what I was essentially doing was dancing on ashes because my whole world had just crumbled. And it was just like, okay, well, let's dance on these ashes. And that is not something people do when they're happy. And what joy does is says, in spite of not having reasons to feel good, not feeling safe, not being secure, I'm going to pull from what's inside of me. And I'm going to nurture my well-being. And there's a researcher, and I wish I could think of her name right now, but she said that the joy can be willed. It can be something that we say,
Mm.
you know what? I'm going to do this anyway. And so it's something that comes from deep within. And it's a practice of well-being.
Behind every mission, every movement, and every attempt to create change, there's a human story shaping how it all unfolds. I'm Dr. Payal Beri, and this is Reframing Perspectives. This podcast is for those change makers, those purpose led founders, nonprofit leaders, growth mindset individuals, and purpose driven entrepreneurs who believe the work that they're doing in the world should actually make people's lives better. Each week, I'm sitting down with change makers who are shaping impact in their industries and communities. And together, we're going to explore the moments, the questions, and the perspective shifts that changed how they lead, how they build relationships, and how they create meaningful change in our world. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives, the podcast for change makers who believe relationships are the real infrastructure of impact. I really, really am so excited to talk to you today. I think that the conversation and the work that you've done and who you are and what you represent, it couldn't be more timely in my life. So I'll be honest, this is partially selfish on my side of anything I'm going to be asking you and talking to you about. But I want to start off with actually telling you and sharing something with you. You mentioned that you're really passionate about wanting to see people not just succeed and be joyful, but really thrive and and flourish. And I was recently at a dinner a couple of weeks ago, and you say it in a way where it's about flourishing, and especially specifically, you're talking about communities, marginalized communities, Black communities, where the environment isn't set up necessarily for that.
Right.
And so it immediately, I thought it was so interesting because 2 weeks ago, I went to a dinner and this dinner was for entrepreneur women, women of color, and to talk about it was for the Lunar New Year. And it's like, come ready with your word. And everyone had their word of audacity and worthiness and triumph. And I could not think of a word. I just found those words to feel a little performative. And and it's not normal. Normally I like to think about that. But when it came to me, I actually said, you know what? I don't have a word. I have a movie in mind. And my movie is Cool Runnings. I am the Jamaican bobsled team that everything is going against me right now, but I am going to show up. And every day when I ask, are you dead yet? And the answer is no, I'm going to keep going. And so when I was reading about you and researching and looking at this and I saw that you really talk about this, I couldn't help but laugh to myself because I really feel like that Cool Runnings Jamaican bobsled team right now. And so much of your work is about helping people see that regardless of their environment, they still absolutely deserve it. It's their right to have joy. They can reclaim that for themselves.
Gosh. That's such a perfect analogy. I had never really connected that movie specifically. But that is such a perfect vibe and spirit for the work around joy. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and watch it again because because again, there was a lot of naysayers, and then there was also, it wasn't the perfect environment for what they were trying to do, but it didn't matter. It was just about who
Mhm.
they were and what they brought out of the situation. That's so good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite movies. It's, you're how are you training in an individuals from an island, a tropical island to win
Right.
the
Right.
bobsled competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then watching the Winter Olympics, this coming off of the heels of that, it was really cool to see this year's Jamaican bobsled team and just like, wow, just I love it. I think it's a great analogy, and I'm gonna have to watch it this week now.
Yeah, amazing. And I think about this also just from when I think about your arcs that you have, and you share that self determination, post traumatic, and then joy. And each of those that you research and you looked at different moments, and I can't help but wonder what was going on in your life that had you really leaning into these art in those specific moments and diving into those things, those pieces.
Well, it's funny you would ask that because if I were to ever write an autobiography of my life, it would definitely those arcs would be the pivotal turning points in my life. And so when I first started my research, like with my doctoral work back in 2009, I didn't know, but I had a divorce coming,
Oh, wow.
and so I was sort of in the middle of what it meant to be self-determined, to get this degree done, to keep pushing forward in the face of, really having the most stable home situation, to make it happen. But the self-determination, which is literally what I was studying at the time, really is the thing that defined my life at that time. And then as we look at post-traumatic growth, well, wow, I started studying that probably about a year, 6 months to a year after my divorce. And so and people and the type of trauma I was studying was broad. It was across the board. So it could have been as, intense as returning to civilian life after combat. It could be that they go home to an environment that doesn't have and the ironic piece is home, but doesn't there is not home stability or shelter or financial stability. So there's a lot of different forms of trauma, but that was what I was celebrating. Maybe there's a word meaning behind me using that word, but it was what I was going through at that time in my life. And then as I stepped into joy in 2019, it was the season of my life where I started to really come into myself. I had transitioned out of that phase. I was probably about a decade in, and I really started to understand what it meant to live from a foundation of well-being and allow that to sort of decide or be the guide for everything else and every decision I made. So it is very interesting to look at those arcs because they do define exactly where I was in life.
Yeah, and I think that there is also such a follow through line to your point of whatever someone is going through in their life. It's like at that one pivotal moment in that beginning stage of the environment that is just havoc, chaotic, whatever it may be, or it's you've grown in a community that tells you that, you're not supposed to amount to anything. I've shared this before with others and, in previous episodes that when I was in college, I was struggling. There's a lot of things going on personally at home. And so my grades slipped and I wasn't doing as well. And the dean actually said to me that you're probably going to amount to nothing. So you should just drop out of college.
Goodness.
And that seed stuck with me for so long that but it caused imposter syndrome. It caused a lot of, for me to not take, on chances on things that if I had, it could have completely changed the trajectory of my life. But the determination of I'm also going to prove you wrong was very much there.
Yes.
But then once you get through it, and I wonder, I'm curious that in this arc that you've designed and you've, put together so beautifully, that self-determination piece, it feels like it has to come first before you can address any of the other parts. Can you address joy while you're still going through those initial parts of that challenge that you have to just use everything in your body to just get through that really hard moment? So when you were going through your divorce, in that moment, could you actually also still incorporate joy?
Hmm. And for me personally at that time, I don't think I had a full understanding of what it was, but I also had a very strong foundation of joy in my own upbringing and childhood. And I honestly didn't really start to experience trauma and the absence of joy until I hit lovely adulthood.
Oh, of course.
My journey is a bit different from those who might have had really difficult childhoods and then emerged into adulthood. So I really am grateful for being armed with that foundation because as soon as it didn't feel right, it didn't like, why isn't the joy vibing the way it used to? There's something just it's not setting well in my spirit in terms of the way that my life was going. So I was able to recognize it much more quickly. And I definitely remember celebrating moments, just small milestones of victory, securing my first apartment after, even though I had just bought a home and it was the second home I bought, there was something joyful about making the move that I made. It was really difficult to leave a marriage, but the moment that I stepped into that apartment, I danced in that empty apartment. because I did it and it was not easy and I didn't know what was next. It wasn't like my life was in a joyful space, but I celebrated that milestone not knowing what was ahead of me. So I had some sense of what it meant to experience it and live it, but I surely didn't understand it the way I do now as an actual intentional life practice.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love the fact that you dance there because I think it's one of the things that we sometimes do is when we think about joy, it feels like everything in your life has to be perfect before you can actually take part in joy.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone recently who was saying that, I work 70 hours, I'm doing all this work and there's no time for fun. And I said, no, there's always time for fun. There's always time for joy. There's always time for that. But one thing you also do is you describe the difference between joy and happiness.
Yeah.
And so I'd love for you to dive into that and what that means because what you're talking about in that moment, you're securing your first apartment, you're dancing in there, there's joy with this, but it's not exactly your happiest moment.
No, it was probably my one of my worst moments. I mean, I have this 2-year-old daughter and this 11-year-old son, and I'm like, what now? And what I was essentially doing was dancing on ashes because my whole world had just crumbled, and it was just like, okay, well, let's dance on these ashes. And that is not something people do when they're happy. When somebody is not experiencing the comfort or getting the things that they want out of life or having certain needs fulfilled, when that is absent, that's not generally the things that bring people happiness. Happiness tends to be around our life circumstances. Am I secure? Am I safe? Do I have my basic needs? Are there people who are giving me reason to feel good? And what joy does is says, in spite of not having reasons to feel good, not feeling safe, not being secure, I'm going to pull from what's inside of me. And I'm going to nurture my well-being. I'm going to will. And there's a researcher, and I wish I could think of her name right now, but she said that the joy can be willed. It can be something that we say, you know what, I'm going to do this anyway. And so it's something that comes from deep within, and it's a practice of well-being. And it's not that happiness isn't, but one of the differences, the ways I like to distinguish the difference is that joy is something that it is about the transformation of our soul and our spirit and our heart, and whereas happiness is really about like peace of mind. And peace of mind is great and that's important to have, but what happens when we don't have peace of mind? What do we tap in at that point?
That's such an interesting perspective. One thing I want to kind of toggle on is you mentioned how you grew up where your childhood was filled of joy. You did have that, but then after going through everything you did, you had to relearn joy.
Yes.
What are those elements that someone can catch where they've been so deep in, especially if we think about COVID, right? When
Oh my
COVID
goodness.
was happening. And
Yeah.
again, I find it so interesting. All of your works happen at these like pivotal moments. And right before COVID, you were also, working on this. And what is it about where I personally don't think that we've even cracked open, even slightly, the door of how we've had to process life post COVID? I think that people are still struggling massively with the way that life and world and everything has shifted since then.
Yeah.
And there's so much of trying to just keep up. And like you said, that, sometimes if your financial security, your home security, all of those things aren't there and your brain is being utilized, the energy of that is being utilized so deeply in making sure that everything around you is safe, that you don't have time to think abundantly always because you're just trying to figure out what's happening next in that moment. How can someone who hasn't experienced joy, hasn't experienced in a long time and I see this a lot with change makers, people who are out there doing the heavy work and they're in those, in the trenches, as I call it,
Mhm.
and they're having to carry on with hope and they're having to carry on in ways that isn't always accessible to them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that is so unique about COVID, it was literally it was kind of like the clash of all the insecurities, the housing security, the health security, financial security, what am I going to do about my job? Or my job is now more intense than it's ever been before because I'm an essential worker, and so all of the things and then everything that, had already a foundation of struggle, it was amplified at that time. So if there were financial challenges, it was amplified. If there was abuse at home, that was amplified. Access to education, where now all of a sudden the young people, the children had to work, do things from home. Do they have the resources? Do they have the space? And so finding joy in that particular era, and even if we scale it back and not even go all the way to joy, finding just peace of mind, or finding a way to not be afraid all the time. That took intentional action to do that. And the joy research I started in 2019, December, and then everything shut down in February. So I had no idea that this was coming when I first started studying it. I noticed differences in how people were coping. It was really the perfect opportunity for me to start looking at things from the lens of joy. And I noticed that people were very intentional about bringing families together on Zoom, having girlfriends nights where we're going to have wine and chat on Zoom, or we're going to go for walks in the park and, wear our masks and, find ways to get out. And so there were some very intentional ways people went about finding joy, spiraling upwards, but we also saw people spiraling downward quite quickly. This is where depression rates were soaring, and people were really struggling with the isolation of loneliness in ways that loneliness didn't scream out quite so loudly until then. So what I saw for the people that were very intentional about their joy, I call that mental stamina. And it's this idea of how well do you exercise that stamina to keep going when you don't know how long this thing is going to last. And that's the worst part, is it wasn't like, we're going to shut down for a month, you guys. And, after a month we can get going. Everybody probably had been happy. Like, yes, I get a month off. But the unknown is what people really struggled with. And that's where mental stamina comes in, because you don't know how long this race is going to be. And in order to really stay standing near the end, people had to be very intentional. And those were the ones that I saw that were able to keep going and encourage the people that were around them.
How do you build that stamina? Because I find that to be something, again, if I think about my life as well as an entrepreneur, there's always something coming up, and there's ups and there's downs, there's, peaks and valleys, all of these things that are happening, personal life. And so the stamina of going, and I think as humans, we crave predictability, we crave control. And so to have something that we have zero control over, which it seems like even in this state, right? COVID started that, it, like to your point, it exasperated the loneliness, it exasperated everything. And now we're in the height of it when we even look at what's happening with technology, with AI, with the world of the way it's going. And we are moving back into analog connections. People are wanting to go out, they're craving human connection, all of those pieces. But how do you keep these two very polar opposite worlds that are existing at simultaneously, where you're able to, how do you balance that with, like, what are the steps of stamina? What are the things that people can do to have that stamina so that they can then invite in joy?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a really specific, at least based on what I saw very specific parameters that people were like making sure they maintain it. And I'll just say that, and they all start with P's. So we have the people that you're around. That makes a huge difference. If you are around people who are also panicking, it is not, you've got to get away from them. Until you've already established your own level of stamina and stability, you got to stay away from the people that are running around the building in chaos. You just got to get away from them. So the people you're around is essential. And then there's the projects. Projects are just, what are the kinds of things you can do to keep yourself grounded or to help yourself fly during those moments. I had a really difficult conversation with a colleague, and that was just this week, and it completely threw off my peace of mind. I was actually quite irate about the way they responded to me. And I just like, how do you calm yourself down? How you calm yourself down? And I immediately immersed myself in an art project that was really creative for me. And I was good, and one of my friends called me to check on me and say, "Are you okay?" Because I had mentioned the situation. And they were just amazed, like, so you just calmed yourself down by working on a project? It works. And so then there's prayer and however that manifests for you or but for some people it is sitting in silence, it is sitting in peace, it is going into ourselves. But yes, those moments of prayer and calm. And then there's patience. We don't know always how long it's going to last. And so exercising patience is really hard, but there are small things we can do to learn patience. For me, I don't like getting to a place too early because I don't like waiting. And and then what that ends up happening is I might be late because something will get in the way of my planned timing. So I have had to force myself, nope, you're going to arrive an hour early and you're going to be patient and you're going to wait. And so I have to do these little things with myself to train myself to become better at being patient. And then the last one is practice. So practicing, so when I say practice mental stamina, it can be really mind exercises with yourself. And so if there's something that really frustrates you, being really intentional about, I'm just going to face this head on. I'm going to dive into it. If it's somebody who really gets on your nerves or drives you crazy, I'm going to put myself in front of them and I'm going to practice being my best self in their presence just for practice. So giving yourself these small challenges in order to develop the mental stamina. It's just like when you're going to the gym. Sometimes getting on the treadmill means I'm just going to do 10 minutes on the treadmill. And your body is going to crave more over time if you keep doing that. So mental stamina works the same way. So I'll say it again, it's people, projects, prayer, patience, and practice. Those are the ways that people can develop mental stamina.
I want to talk about the projects piece of it because you mentioned how you directly went to, arts and that really helped you. And I found that for myself as well. I also find it really interesting that you went to, coloring and arts when you were upset this time around. You danced when you were in the apartment. There's this creative energy that's really coming out that it's like an expression of moving your body or just finding ways to just flow. How much of those projects that you're talking about are really leaning into that creative lens and creativity? Some people are like, well, I'm not a creative person, but I mean everything has creativity. If you're a strategist, you're working in a creative ways, thinking outside the box. But you danced, you did art. How much of that do you feel is calls in that piece of joy that helps your PTSD, helps the trauma, helps everything actually subside?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because the project that I engaged in, the creative project I engaged with, was actually developing strategy. And I had creative ways to do that using AI and using, a lot of different tools that enabled me to tap into my artsy side. So projects, for some who may not think they're creative, it's really if you're creating something, if you're building or envisioning something, it doesn't have to be coloring or creating art pieces. It could be that this project is something that utilizes the part of my brain that's creating something. And whether that's an idea or a tangible thing that somebody can walk away with. Um, for me, I am, and you've definitely picked up on it. I'm definitely more on the creative end of things. So for me, sometimes it's writing, and doodling. I have a coloring book series, and so for me, honestly, the creative piece of that was creating the coloring book series. How many times have I opened the book to color? Probably never. But creating the coloring book series for me was just as fulfilling as it might be for somebody to open the book and color the page. So we do have to tap into what resonates with who we are for that project piece to really be effective. It can't be a labor intensive kind of thing that brings you down. The point is, how do I get those endorphins going and get myself up for, in spite of what's going on?
There's also this piece of And I find this a lot with, whether it's friends or whether it's change makers, is that type A personality that needs to have some level of, I need a project, I need a purpose, I need something. And that's how then they find joy. How and I kind of find that I see this in myself sometimes too, but I find that to be sometimes challenging because now you're tying that your level of productivity, your level of purpose, your project, anything that you're doing that even if it's supposed to be for fun has now turned into, how is this a measurable
You're
data piece, right? And I think of it also as what millennials have been really great at creating and post is all of these apps that are, how well did you sleep? How well did you do? How many steps did you walk? What's your breath look like? What's your heart rate? Everything is monitored
right.
so much that, do you feel like in this space that we've built to optimize everything, that it actually robs us of being able to embrace joy?
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes it's important to train ourselves to do something for nothing, for no reason, just because of the pure fact that this is good for my well-being. And that's it. Because I'm definitely guilty of checking out how many did I get these many steps today and did I do this? Because those kinds of things are great for my accountability. But how do I not turn it into something, well, you failed today. You only got 8,900 steps. As opposed to celebrating, you got 8,900 steps. That is intentional work there.
Right.
And so I think it's a matter of being able and willing. You have to be intentional about celebrating what you're doing and sometimes just doing it for no necessary end goal. I'm just doing it because it feels good. I'm just going out for a walk because I want to feel the sun on my skin. I'm not going to measure it today. And even what I was doing earlier this week with the strategic proposal, I was more focused on the fun parts of it. Those are good colors. Oh, wow, okay, what if I used this? And so for me, it was more of that and not really worrying about the content and the business component of it in that moment. So that's important.
Yeah, and I find that really one of the areas that change makers, people who are out there that constantly are leading with purpose-led work, have a hard time embracing. They're more able to, I think, embrace your earlier arcs of the self-determination. Yep, that makes sense. Trauma, absolutely. I'm living it day to day. But there's this, so how do you help people who are so purposeful and purpose-led to be able to embrace joy in a way that you have been able to do in your life?
Mhm. Well, sometimes it does start with the systematic processes because I mean, I've had so many people tell me, I'm thinking of one gentleman in particular, and he's like, joy is just not natural to me. I mean, I don't just wake up in the morning and jump for joy. I said, well, I mean, I don't think most of us do unless we're really intentional. That's what intentional people do.
Right. And that actually sounds like a response of resistance, a
It is.
resistance of, yeah, how defensiveness of like, I'm not going to be this cheesy. It's almost like that person that is expecting to be happy. It's like, no one's asking you to be, you know, Tigger from.
Right, and that sounds very performative. "Oh, I gotta get up and jump for joy," and I'm like, I'm a joy researcher, and I don't even do that. In fact, we wanna get really real about what I do in the morning when I wake up. I'm a night owl, so the mornings, I really intentionally start late mornings, but every now and then, somebody wants to meet at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., which, for me, that's early. For most people, oh, that's the start of the workday, and when I have those days and my alarm goes off, sometimes the first word that comes out of my mouth is, damn it. And I'm the joy researcher. I don't wake up and jump for joy. In fact, I've had to be very intentional about saying, you will not allow that to be the first word that comes out of your mouth in the morning. And
Yeah.
so it's intentional work and it starts that way. But then at some point it becomes natural and it becomes who you are. In fact, it starts to feel so natural that anything that sort of contradicts that more easily rubs you the wrong way and more easily is noticeable. And that is really helpful to you when you are going into different kinds of relationships, whether it's personal or business relationships, stepping into new environments. You feel it because you've already trained yourself to know what it feels like to experience joy. So I don't think it doesn't always start as a natural thing. Sometimes it starts as a systematic process to intentionally bring joy into your life.
I think you touched on something so interesting, and that is actually looking at the way that we use language in anything that we're experiencing. Performative, we see it in positive toxicity. We see it in the way that I wake up every day and I do breath work and then I drink a glass of water with lemon and then I journal and then I do it's like, no,
Which
that is not everyone's reality, first of all. It's also there's some days that fine, you are, and there's some days where it's like, no, I turn on TikTok and I watch about like 15 minutes of TikTok, before I get out of bed. But it's what you're talking about is I think that people have again, it's that optimization. It's that I've got to do joy right.
Mhm. Yeah.
And there is no right way of doing joy. It's simply about it's a feeling. It's a feeling that you're embracing for to be able to would it be appropriate to say that it's a feeling that you're embracing because it's your right and it's something that you absolutely should as a human find moments of joy. But second is that it really is something that allows you to sustain and maintain the longer just the duress that comes with being an adult and with all the challenges and the overconsumption and overwhelm that we now have opened ourselves up to.
I would say that it is an embodiment. And
Mm.
so it is something that we embody. And there are times where we may not feel great, but when we embody it, we will it. We say that, you know what, I'm gonna. I don't like the fact that I'm getting up at 7:45 in the morning for this meeting, but I'm going to do something that brings me life in this moment. So I'm going to turn on. Sometimes I'll turn on there's all kinds of music channels on YouTube, and I'll turn that on and I'll start dancing. Here I am with the dancing again. I did not make a single dance team I tried out for, by the way.
Really? Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, you have a very impressive track record when it comes to and with Olympics and now going into football. Like there's a whole other series that
Yeah.
we yeah.
Yeah, the dance, but it is what I do because it
Yeah.
feels good. Even if I'm just doing this kind of stuff in the house, it doesn't,
Yeah.
I'm moving. And that is a really important component is in terms of how do you will the joy into your life? How do you embody it? And I think one of the best ways of embodying it is through movement. And it's not, obviously, that's not for everybody. It really depends. And when you said there's no right way or wrong, way to do joy, my movement might be hell and excruciating for somebody else. So I'm not going to tell them like, well, you need to
Yeah.
move. So it really does. It is a matter of figuring out how you can embody joy with, the being that you are,
Yeah.
regardless of what's going on.
Yeah. I actually grew up as a dancer and as a choreographer, and I thought I was going to be a choreographer when I grew up. But I always say that everyone can dance; they just have their own style. It's you could do the Carlton, or you could do you could be like a beautiful ballet dancer. Either way, but it all works. Yes. And what I'm also really hearing is honesty. Right. So if we take it back to that person who was saying that, like, well, I don't wake up first thing in the jumping out of joy. And it's like, well, yeah, that's honesty. It's, you saying that, oh my God, this person is scheduled an 8 a.m. meeting, like, F me right now. Like that is honesty. And I think in order to be able to take that next step into like it's acceptance of that honesty. It's not about like, I'm gonna find the joy in this meeting. It's like, no, it's like, let's be honest. It's like that's a morning meeting that really sucks. Like similar to you, I'm not a morning person at all. When I'm
Uh,
jet lagged and I happen to wake up at 5 a.m. because of my jet lag, I actually look at that as like, wow, so this is what morning people have? And I'm like, wow, this is interesting. Oh, I see why morning people like this, but I'm good.
yeah.
It's looking at that perspective is what I see is like the honesty that's baked into for
Yeah.
being able to accept whatever joy works for you.
So yeah, and what that reminds me of is so now, fast forward, I don't know how many years later, maybe 15 years later, I lost count at some point how long I've been divorced. And now, my daughter and her dad and I, co-parenting is a great situation. And so he got remarried, and one of the things that totally changed the dynamic in the family was his new wife. And she comes with all the bells and whistles and all the so when we go to my daughter's dance recitals when she was younger, we were used to sitting there like this and wiping a tear. And oh my gosh, this woman, and I say it in the most endearing way ever, brought her family and they'd be like, yes. And my daughter's name is Joya. Yeah. And we're like, wait, you're not supposed to do that. And my parents are the quietest, most conservative, like behaving people I know. And so they would be sitting there with us with their hands folded, just looking with a tear going down the face. Now my dad will say, Joya. So we might start in one way, but it's amazing how contagious joy is and how influential the energy of his wife and how and what that brought to our family in terms of outward expression of joy. And it's not that we were doing it wrong, but she introduced us to a whole other way. And it's just hilarious and beautiful to see my parents scream out in ways I've never seen them do before.
That sounds so amazing. This actually reminds me of also, I have a friend, she's South Indian, and South Indian culture is similar. It's a lot more quiet, it's more conservative, and it's not loud at all. Their weddings are also very, very long and very religious, versus I'm North Indian. And in Punjabi specifically, in Punjabis, we're loud. We drink. Our music is, bhangra. It's like played everywhere. It's just, we're obnoxious. And anyways, her sister recently just got married to a South Indian, but she and her family, when they walked in, I guess they were behaving more like a North Indian family, and they were just so loud and just like hugging and everything. And it just like, are they like they were so confused with how, but then what they were able to do, what was really interesting, what I'm hearing also in your story, is that there was almost like permission given that
Mm,
it's
mm,
okay to express yourself in this way. It's like there's there was a part of them that may have wanted it, but it was asleep and it wasn't allowed and to your point of the people you surround yourself with. And so by having, you know, your daughter's stepmom come in and your ex-husband's wife come in and her family being just celebrating for your parents to see this other woman celebrating your daughter in a way that is so full of love
yes.
must have also been like, wow, this person can celebrate our daughter in this way that is just full of so much love and care. How could we not join in on that?
Right. It is indeed contagious. And again, it's not to say one way is right or the other, but to be able to introduce each other to the ways that you express joy is powerful. And one other event comes to mind. This is actually my wedding, the irony.
And I love that your daughter's name is Joya, by the way.
And that is the craziest thing ever because I did not know I was going to be doing this. But our grandmothers were at the wedding and they were both the same age. And so, probably at that time, they were in their late 70s. And his grandmother's Caribbean from Belize, and my grandmother is from Mississippi. And so, totally different cultures. But his wedding, we were playing Caribbean fast music, and I, for the first time in my life, saw my grandmother get up and shake her hips and dance. And
I
that's
love
because his grandmother, that is the culture. And she's up there and she's dancing, moving her hips. My grandmother, all I ever heard her sing was, gospel music humming in the kitchen. This woman got up and hands in the air, shaking her hips. I'm like, whoa.
That's
So
so beautiful.
the contagious nature of joy expression is just like it's powerful. It could send waves, across the globe if we just stepped into each other's of being.
And I'm also just hearing so much openness with that. The level of what joy can do, to your point of that contagiousness, is the same effect that fear can have.
Yes.
But with joy, you're bringing people in, you're creating a feeling of safety. You're creating a feeling of that you belong here. This is inclusive. For your grandmother to step up again, I can't help but think about the fact that the time of life, what she's seen in her life, what she had gone through, what was accepted, how she had to possibly keep herself to some level invisible in order to not cause ruffle feathers or any of this. And being able to self express and express loudly brings in attention.
Yeah.
And it also claims yourself to being able to say, like, look at me and accepting that. And I think that joy is something that what I'm hearing over and over again, whether it's through That again, I'm gonna take it back to that apartment that you had and dancing in there and the fact that you named your daughter Joya and going through this and the stories that you shared is joy, self-embodiment, the expression of this, the contagious feeling of it. What it's really creating is someone to really claim themselves and honor who they are, that identity. And I know you talk a lot about joy is resistance, which I've also heard from many others who study joy as well, because especially in marginalized communities, joy is often stripped from them, that this is not something that they're able to have. So the way that you bring it in through that self expression really is about no, you are absolutely allowed to have joy. And when you do it through that loud self expression, it feels like it again, it sparks something in your grandmother to be like, wait a second, I can also embody this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would love to have had the opportunity to sit down with her in real time now and say, look, what was that about?
Yeah.
Just to know what was going on in that moment for her. But yeah, it was quite powerful to see.
In your 16 years of studying joy, what's the most surprising thing that you've discovered about your own?
I think the contagious part has stood out just in terms of my own joy because it has given people permission who haven't been able to really express it, permission to just let it out. I'm currently in a relationship, and when we first met, he's very subdued and very calm. And I recognize random moments where he said, "No, I'm going to claim this joy. I'm going to do it." And we were in Costa Rica and we were sitting at a restaurant and he's like, I'll be right back. And he goes out and he goes to a playground and he gets on the playground and he starts walking on the bridge and he starts like, what's he doing? And then he came back in and sat down. He said, I just had to have a moment of play.
I love that.
Yeah. And that isn't something I've ever seen him do before. And so, it's kind of cool to see how when you're in a dynamic that gives you permission to express the joy, what happens when people have the permission to do that. And so that I've been able to see that in just different relationships and in my daughter when I'm an empty nester now, she's away at college, but when she would have her friends over, they would be upstairs screaming at the top of their lungs in joy about something. I have no idea. And I know that a lot of families have said, you guys need to be quiet up there. What's all that yelling? And it would be in pretty intense yelling and screaming. But I just fully allowed it, like, just let it out, whatever is going on, and there was also a moment where she was very frustrated, and she also went into the basement, and she had something that, she was able to hit things with and just let it out, and so I think that going back to your idea of honesty, being able to recognize and acknowledge the emotions that are coming up for us and being able to do something about it as opposed to no, I can't show this anger because I'm going to get in trouble. No, let's talk about how to express it. And your anger is telling you something. Your peace of mind, your joy is telling you something. Let's listen, to those emotions.
Our bodies are very intuitive, and it really does tell us what we need in that moment. And if we are allowed to express it, then we're able to release that. Versus, I think we spend so much time intellectualizing our emotional capacity instead of allowing our bodies to feel it. And what you've said so beautifully throughout this whole conversation is just about how letting yourself embody the emotional response that you have.
Who are afraid of those emotions,
Right.
afraid of
Because,
anger.
right.
What am I going to do if I let this anger out completely? Or afraid of their joy. So many people I interview talk about fear of fully just letting the
Right.
joy. So,
Yeah, there's fear of joy because if I feel this too much, then what's going to go wrong?
yep.
Since that's always been a part of their experiences and stuff. So last question for you is where can someone start when they have that reluctancy to express themselves, when they feel conscious of how they're being perceived when they're expressing their joy?
Well, thankfully, there's a lot of resources, and there are people out there who are really naming this whole joy thing now. And so for me, I start with where I guess this sounds real corny, I know, but where my heart leads me. And that's in music. So I make sure that I fill my house with music that inspires me, that makes me feel let me just start there at least. But then I'm also very intentional about the people And so I think somebody can start with, how do you turn your environment, in even the smallest ways possible, into something that has micro doses of joy? What little micro doses of joy can you create or expose yourself to? And and then there's an educational process associated with it. So, read about it, listen to podcasts, and immerse yourself in it, just as you would if you were trying to become a specialist in a certain area. You want that level of expertise for your own personal well being and peace of mind. So I would say start with creating little microdoses of things, connecting with people who are also on the same mission, and then just joining opportunities to immerse yourself into joy. Podcasts. I have a joy retreat, going to, taking different courses, reading books, become an sort of a student of the craft of joy.
Love that. I love, first of all, I got to check out your joy retreat. That sounds amazing. I would love to be a part of that myself. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining Reframing Perspectives, because you really have reframed the perspective of joy and what this could feel like in a day to day, and especially when we're going through such challenging moments in life and circumstances. So thank you so much for everything that you shared today.
Yeah, no, thank you. The dialogue was amazing. Your questions were really cool. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, friends. I have a favor to ask you. If you're enjoying these episodes, then I'd really love it if you could subscribe, leave a review, or share it with your friends and family. And the more that we can grow, the more feedback that we get from you through those reviews, the more we can make sure that we're creating meaningful episodes that you want to listen to. So, whether it's following us, subscribing, hitting the button below, if you can leave a review for us, or if you just share this with your friends and family, the episodes that you think that they would really resonate with, it means more to us than you can imagine. Thank you so much.